What's up guys, how you doing? So I'm standing here at Grabo Tower and we've got a beautiful view just down behind me here. You can see the Ards Peninsula, hopefully you can see that. And it's overlooking Newton Ards here, just outside Belfast. And today what I want to talk about is Spring Boot 1.4 and a couple of really cool annotations that you can use. And specifically the one I want to talk about for this video is the MockBean annotation. So if you're using Spring Boot 1.4 and you want to test a class and maybe you don't want to actually call out to the service classes that are encapsulated within it, but what you can do is actually use MockBean in your test class, and you basically write the class that you want to mock, annotate it with MockBean, and then you can go ahead and use the Mockito given and then return result. So you can use these methods to actually say, okay, when I call this class with these arguments on this method, then I want you to return this value. So you can go ahead and write these nice mocks out, and it'll enable you to really write great tests. And it's really good if you want to test a class or maybe just test a specific class. So if you're testing, say, a controller method, so Spring MVC controller, or delivering like a RESTful service, well, maybe you don't want to actually go out and test all the classes inside, like the service calls and whatever it's going to delegate the work to. So you can use this in tandem with your controller tests. So that's what I want to show you guys today. So I'm hoping you're enjoying the view up here. Yeah, do you like that? So of course this is part of me bringing you to the random locations that I like to travel to at the weekend, and I'm starting to video some code. So hopefully you guys enjoy the code here. I'm gonna write some loads of examples for you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. I'll keep producing more content like this. So have a good day, thanks. Okay, so in this tutorial I'm going to show you guys how you can use Mockito MockBean and the Spring Boot Mockito annotations combined with some controller tests. So that's going to be a WebMvc test, and how these are really great tests that you can have in your CI/CD pipeline. So the first thing you want to do is go ahead and create a Spring starter project. I've got all mine laid out already. It's going to be a Spring Boot Mockito name. And I'm going to bring in the web dependency only. And that's going to also bring down my test dependencies for my project. So I'm going to take a test-driven development approach here. So I'm going to start building for my tests and then start building the controllers out after. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the boilerplate test class. And I'm going to create a new class. And inside that, I'm going to create a controllers package, which I'm also going to create in a minute in the source main Java. And I'm going to call this a policy controller test. So that indicates that I'm going to be testing the policy controller class, which does not exist yet. So the first thing I want to do is go ahead and use the Spring Boot application, Spring annotations. So I'm going to say we're going to run with the Spring Runner class. So let's bring in the Spring Runner class. And what I also want to do is bring in a WebMvc test. So if you're not familiar with this is a kind of newer test. And this is going to indicate that we're testing a Spring controller or a Spring MVC controller. So the Spring WebMvc test is going to auto-configure our Spring MVC's infrastructure, but it's only going to limit the scan beans to the likes of controllers, controller device, or filters, and it's not going to resolve or create our normal component beans. So we're going to combine this with our Mockito test, and we're going to use Mockito to mock out our service layer with the new Spring Boot annotations. So let's go ahead and actually test our class. So we haven't created it yet, but it's going to be called the policy controller class. So you want to save that, and we're going to let the IDE do the heavy lifting. So we're going to create the class policy controller in source main Java. Click finish. And of course, this is going to be a REST controller. And now what we want to do is create our first test. So what do we need to do then? Well, what we need to do is auto-wire. So we want to bring in our MockMvc, which is going to be automatically configured for us and will be available via injection. So let's call it MVC. So let's write our first JUnit test. So MockMvc is going to allow us to make MVC calls, or sorry, HTTP calls across to our actual controller. But of course, it's not going to actually call. So let's go ahead and let's write our first test. We're going to say public void, and of course I'm going to call it test, but it shouldn't be called test in real life. You want to give your test a really good descriptive name. But what we're going to say in here is MVC, and then we're going to say perform, and this is where we bring in the request builders. So you're going to want to bring in the request builders and the result matchers, which we're going to use in a second. So once they're imported, you want to basically say, let's make a GET request, and we're going to make that GET request to the policy controller class, and we're going to go to the URL, which we haven't created yet, and we're going to pass in the policy number, which we have not defined yet in our method scope. So let's go ahead and do that now. So go ahead and hover over URL, create constant, and we're going to call that URL. We're going to say policy / and then let's pass in the policy number. So that way we have a path variable there. And in our URL here, we need to pass in the parameters. So we're going to say, okay, we're going to give the policy number a number of 5. So now we're going to call that, and we're going to say, okay, let's accept, and we're going to give it a media type. So let's say media type. And what we want is the likes of JSON, so JSON UTF-8. And then we're going to say we expect, so this is where we start matching. So we say we expect a status code of 200, so that's an OK message. And we expect the content of the body of the payload to contain a string, and that string is going to contain the text Philip. So you want to go ahead and save that, then change that to throw the exception out of the method. And of course, we don't have anything defined, so if we run this test, we're going to see it fail. We're going to see a red bar, which is what we want first. We want to see the red bar first. We want to say red, green, refactor. So of course we have a 404 because it does not exist. So go into your policy class, and what we want to do is actually define a RESTful method. So a REST method. We're going to say request mapping. We're going to pass in the URL, and what we're going to say here is we're going to return a string. Remember, we wanted to return my name, and we're going to say get policy. Sorry, not controller. It's very late where I am. It's after midnight, so pardon if if things don't make sense. And we're going to say what we want to pass in is the path variable. So that's the policy number, as you see defined here in the braces. So policy number, final int, policy number. So it must be an integer. And we're going to then say we want to delegate this work out to our actual service class. But first of all, let's get a pass in. So let's return Philip. So you want to save that. Go back to our JUnit, run that again, proceed. Of course, we've got an error here, but this is my IDE error because I turned my constraints up to the top. So I have a red squiggly line because the variable is not used. So I indicate all that as errors. It's good to turn all that up in your IDE. Now you see it's a green bar, so that's cool. But what we want to do is actually delegate the work to a service class. So let's go ahead and create a constructor here. And inside the constructor, what we want is to inject a policy service, which of course we have not created yet. And we want to assign that to the actual policy service. And you'll see that class is not created. So let's create a class policy service. And we'll create that in services. And it's going to be a service. Oh, I wonder what happened there. A service. And we're going to have one method, and it's going to be a public method that returns a string. And we're going to say get policy. So the same method. And we're going to pass in the int. We're going to pass in the policy number, and we're going to say return if the policy number is greater than 5, then let's return Philip. If it's not greater than 5, then we will return my surname, which is start. So go ahead and save that. Change all your imports. And now you'll see this isn't a variable. So what we want to do is go ahead and create the field, change it to final. So Spring Boot's going to automatically auto-wire us in this policy service now, as if we have one constructor, and it's going to, and the variables inside it are components that are going to be auto-scanned for us. It'll automatically inject them in. So what we want to do is change return Philip to return policy service dot get policy, pass in the policy number, and let's save that and run that. So now we'll see that that's going to fail again because our dependency is not existent. So what we need to do is create that dependency. So what you want to do is go ahead and create MockBean. So this is where we start using the Mockito annotations in conjunction with our tests. So what MockBean is going to do is it's going to define a Mockito MockBean inside our application context for whatever class we define below here. So if we write Mockito, and then what we want to do is mock the policy service. Save that, change your imports. And now when we run that, it'll pass back blank because it returns an empty string for methods because we haven't given it anything to define on or what we wanted to return on. So here you can see it fails because we expected Philip, but it was blank. And of course our policy number is 5. And even if we did call the real service, policy number has to be greater than 5 to return Philip. So let's go ahead and change our policy controller to 6 just to keep it consistent. Save that. But what we want to do is bring in the Mockito behavior driven development annotations. So go and bring in that import, and now this gives us a really cool ability. So we can say given the policy service, which is now a mock, and we want to call a method and give it some arguments. So we say get policy, pass in the policy number. So when we call policy service passing in 6, then we want it to return, you know it, my name. So we want to save that, rerun the test. Let's see what the results are now. So now you see it passes. So this gives you the really great control to write really great controller tests. So you're going to define and test against your actual controller. So that's the endpoint. Maybe it's a really complex endpoint with different, it produces different data formats. It expects certain parameters. There's different path variables in there, or different certain kinds of conditions. So this way we can basically extract out and mock out our service classes that are contained, and that will ultimately delegate the real work to in our real application. But what you could also do is, just to make this even more perfect, is use the verify. So we want to make sure that this mock was actually called. So what we say is verify, pass in the policy service. That'll give us an instance back, and we can say get policy, pass in the policy number, and that's going to verify that the policy service method get policy actually was called once. So if you go ahead and run that, you'll see we'll get a green bar because it actually is returning Philip, and we know that it is now. So JUnit green. But what you can do is also have a comma there, and you can write times 0. So if you don't want it to be called, or if you don't want a certain mock to be called, you can say, okay, I don't want it to be called. Let's verify that it's not called. So in this instance, we know it is called once, and I've wrote times 0, so our test now fails. So it's another really neat, really cool annotation you can go ahead and use. So I hope you enjoyed this test-driven development approach, where I defined and used Mockito and the Spring Boot 1.4 and upwards annotations to define really cool tests. And you know, writing good quality tests should be at the forefront of every developer's mind. You know, the better your tests are, the more consistent your software is, the higher quality it is, the more confident you have in your code base, and that'll ultimately mean you can deploy between your environments quicker and get your features to production as soon as possible to enable your delivering business value results quicker to the consumers. So make sure you subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this video. You know, I love producing content for you guys. I really enjoy this, and let me know what you want, and I'll keep on producing these. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.